In the context of increasingly strained relations between Russia and NATO, post-Soviet countries in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus assume a particular geopolitical importance. Squeezed between the two sides, these states must carefully choose their foreign policy in order to maintain good ties with both parties without leaning excessively towards either. Otherwise, they risk becoming conflict zones with detrimental consequences for their stability, territorial integrity, and independence. I'm your host Kasim, and thanks for joining me for another KJ vid. In this video we will discuss the hotspots of the NATO-Russia confrontation. But just before we begin, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can help to fund our videos and make KJ vids self-sustainable. Sadly, due to the nature of our videos, YouTube consistently demonetizes them as they apparently fit the politically sensitive category. You can also access our full reports and exclusive content by becoming a Patreon member from as little as $1 per month. The post-Soviet space, and especially its western side, has a pivotal importance in Russia's geopolitical thinking. The country's vast plains leave it exposed to foreign invasions, as history has shown many times, and this has convinced Russia that it needs the largest possible buffer zone between its core territories and any potential aggressor. But somehow, paradoxically, this defensive need has motivated Russia's expansion through the centuries. During imperial and especially Soviet times, Russia had extended its influence over most of Central Asia and large swaths of Central Eastern Europe. The latter was particularly important, as it means controlling the narrowest point of the Great European Plain, the gateway for any invasion coming from the west. But when the USSR collapsed, Moscow lost its grip over this vast area, and its power was now limited to Russia itself. Yet especially with President Putin in charge, the Kremlin continues considering the post-Soviet space as its sphere of influence and an essential zone for Russia's national security. Therefore, it is determined to keep it in its orbit and an essential zone for Russia's national security. Therefore, it is determined to keep it in its orbit, or at least to prevent these countries from turning westwards by joining the EU and, most importantly, NATO. Even though the alliance is defensive and would never attack Russia, Moscow still perceives and depicts it as a menace. Several officials and President Putin himself have repeatedly warned that Russia would respond to such scenarios, and this explains what actually happened in Georgia and Ukraine. Georgia was the first country to experience a Russian intervention largely aimed at preventing it from joining the EU and NATO. Located in the Caucasus region, this country has had issues with Russian separatism since before its independence in 1991. Georgia hosts ethnic Russian minorities in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, who gradually took control of the respective regions with Moscow's support. The conflict remained frozen until the election of President Saakashvili in 2004, as he pledged to restore full control over the secessionist areas. However, negotiations stalled and brought no results. In the meanwhile, he also strengthened Georgia's ties with the US and other Western powers, and hoped to bring the country into NATO. This move was endorsed by former President George W. Bush, who during the Alliance Summit held in Bucharest in April 2008, pushed for Georgia and Ukraine to become full members. In the end, it was decided not to offer them a membership plan of action, but it was also stated that they would ultimately join one day. Naturally, this was not seen positively in the Kremlin, and President Putin stated that NATO's expansion was a direct threat to Russian security. From Moscow's optic, Georgia is regarded as a buffer zone, but also as a doorway to the Middle East, and controlling Abkhazia is useful to extend Russian power over the Black Sea. As a result, Putin acted to prevent Georgia from entering NATO. In August 2008, South Ossetian separatists started shelling positions of the Georgian army, to which Saakashvili answered by ordering a counterattack. At that point, Russia launched a military campaign which included the first use of cyber operations in warfare. The war ended after 5 days with the EU-backed truce, but a definitive settlement is yet to be reached. Still, Russia had ensured its indirect control over the two regions, where it also established military bases and managed to stop Georgia's bid to join NATO. Today, this situation risks to repeat itself. During her inauguration speech, the newly elected Georgian president, Salome Zurabishvili, openly stated that she wants the country to become part of the EU and NATO. Naturally, Russia does not welcome this. When questioned about NATO's enlargement to Georgia and Ukraine, Putin declared during a TV interview that took place before the election of Mrs. Zurabishvili that the advancement of NATO infrastructure towards our borders poses a threat, and our reaction to it will be extremely negative. This makes it reasonable to think that if Georgia will pursue its quest for EU and NATO membership, then Russia will intervene to stop it, possibly with military means. Ukraine followed a similar path. After the fall of the USSR, it kept oscillating between Russia and the West. Following disputed elections, the mass protests known as the Orange Revolution resulted in Russian-supported candidate Viktor Yanukovych to back down and leave the presidency to Viktor Yushchenko and his colleague Yulia Tymoshenko, who became Prime Minister. The two pursued a reformist and pro-Western policy, and in March 2008 they submitted an official letter of application to NATO membership. But in the aforementioned Bucharest summit of the following month, the bid was rejected. Still, as noted, full membership for Ukraine and Georgia was promised in the future, and Russia's reaction was far from positive. It is notable that Yushchenko's presidency was marked by several gas wars with Russia, who repeatedly cut gas supplies to Ukraine and exploited debts to pressure the country. Also, to avoid it, would pursue EU or NATO membership. In 2010, Yanukovych won the elections and switched back to a philo-Russian stance. He passed a law preventing Ukraine to enter in any military alliance, thus indefinitely blocking the process to join NATO. Interestingly, gas disputes between the two countries stopped during this period. In 2013, also because of trade sanctions from Moscow, Yanukovych rejected a trade deal with the EU in favour of economic aid from Russia in the form of a discount on gas and of buying government bonds. This caused large-scale demonstrations centred in Kyiv's Maidan Square. The EU and the US supported the opposition, which included Ukraine nationalists. In February 2014, after violent clashes, an EU-endorsed deal seemed to have solved this impasse, but the situation degenerated when the most radical faction rejected the plan, demanding Yanukovych's immediate resignation. The president fled to Russia, who in turn occupied Crimea with a covert military action. Soon, Russian-backed militias took power in the Donbas area, Ukraine's eastmost region, which hosts a significant Russian population. Since then, war has been raging in the region and gas corrals have emerged once again. However, Russia's policy may have backfired in this case. A 2015 poll showed that support for NATO membership had grown to 64% in government-controlled areas, and the executive in Kyiv has taken several steps paving the way to joining the alliance. Today, Ukraine remains a major hotspot, and the situation could easily warm up again, as it happened following the Kerch Strait incident in November 2018. In some places, the conflict has not yet emerged, but may do in the future. This is the case of the three Baltic states, all NATO and EU members since 2004. Arguably, it was this first enlargement that prompted Russia to be suspicious towards the two organisations and become more assertive with Georgia and Ukraine. With the Baltic countries, the problem responds to military strategy concerns. Latvia and Estonia are the only two NATO countries bordering Russia's core territory, and they plus Lithuania separate it from the exclave of Kaliningrad. They are also very close to St. Petersburg, an important economic centre and naval base, and their membership to NATO threatens Russia's ability to operate in the Baltics. As such, they would be a primary target in case of war with the alliance. A 2016 RAND report concluded that Russia could occupy all three in just a few days. Since they already played a part of NATO, it is very unlikely that Russia would actually invade them. But it has already employed cyber attacks and might decide to opt for a full military action in case relations with the alliance further deteriorate and it deploys assets that are deemed too menacing. This also raises important questions for NATO, as it is uncertain whether it would actually risk a fully fledged war with Russia to protect the three states. Finally, Belarus may also become a future flashpoint. Until now, it has been ruled by President Alexander Lukashenko since 1994. He has always been attentive to maintain positive relations with Russia, even though there have been occasional disagreements. Most importantly, Lukashenko never tried bringing Belarus into either the EU or NATO. Yet he will not remain in charge forever. One day he will lose power or simply pass away. This is problematic as it is unclear what political force will succeed him. If another official attentive to Moscow's interests takes power, then the status quo will endure. Considering the country's limited civil society, this could indeed happen. But if things turn chaotic after his demise and a pro-Western movement gains the upper hand and starts advocating for Belarus to join the EU and NATO, then Russia will likely react similarly to what it did in Ukraine. According to some rumours, Russia left garrisons in Belarus after the Zapad military exercise in 2017, and this could also be a measure to enable a rapid intervention in such a scenario. There is much potential for instability in the post-Soviet space in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, especially in a moment of strained relations between Russia and NATO, since any conflict could turn into a large-scale war between nuclear powers. As such, all the political actors involved in these countries should be careful to act with restraint to avoid an escalation, as it would have deleterious consequences for locals and for international peace. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. What are your views on the NATO-Russia confrontation? We would love to hear your views in the comments below. Please consider supporting us on Patreon so we can produce more of these geopolitical reports and help us keep independent from political influence. Thanks for watching again and see you next time.